program in and out. So welcome everybody. This is the meeting of the Dynamic Coalition Core Internet Values of the IGF Internet Governance Forum in the session of 2021. It is taking place both in presence in Katowice, Poland, and through remote participation, like most of the speakers in this session. I'm very glad to welcome everybody to this meeting, everybody who's enrolled as a speaker, and everybody else as well who can join and live in the discussion. Sorry, I'm having some big noise out here. So, without further ado, I think we should start doing our work. It has been a pleasure to work with Olivier Crepin-Guerlon and many of you in crafting the program and having very enriching discussions during the process of where we were crafting the program. And sometimes it's hard to capture those when the meeting actually arrives, but I think we will do a good job with that. So the point here is picking up from last year, where we had a very rich discussion together with the DC on IoT and Internet of Things, where we were able to explore a number of issues coming from the response to the pandemic, and we found how many of these responses have challenged the very idea of the internet in some parts of the world. It has been truly tested, and we were very blessed to have people like Olga Makharova, who's with us this year again, to tell us about the operational experience more than within a single ISP and more with the tissue of cooperation that underlies the internet. That was extremely valuable, and I'm sure that we will be having very much the same this year. So without further ado, let's start with our speakers. I beg you to make a brief self-presentation if you feel you need. Some of you are so well known in our community that you really don't need it, but those are the ones I would like to make more sure that nobody misses who is who and what their achievements are. So that gives them a lot of authority for speaking in this particular forum. So Olivia, we have the speakers order. We're going to start.
Yes, thank you very much, Alejandro. Olivier Crepin-Guerlon speaking, and welcome everyone. I'm the chair of the Dynamic Coalition on Core Internet Values, and I was just going to give you a brief background of the coalition and of what we mean by core internet values. The coalition has been in place for more than 10 years. And what we focus on are what some call the internet invariants, the values by which, or technical values by which the internet was built and is based on. There are a number of them. I can go through them briefly. The first is that the internet is a global medium, open to all, regardless of geography or nationality. It's interoperable because it's a network of networks, effectively. It doesn't rely on a single type of underlying technology, whether at the physical or the application level. There's a mix of technologies that all work together with just this one basic TCP/IP transport technology that makes them all compatible with each other. It's an open network, as a network of networks. Any service, application, or type of data, voice, video, data, and so on is available and can freely transfer across the net. It's free of any centralized control. The only supposed control is the domain naming system, which provides a single translation system between domain names and IP addresses, and that's of course needed. It's by design. It's end-to-end, so traffic can go from one end of the network to the other end of the network unhindered. It's user-centric, and the users have fully control over what they send and receive, and it's robust and it's reliable. Now, these were the values as they started. You might now raise your eyebrows and think, well, wait a minute, it really isn't so much like this these days. And yes, it has changed over time, and the coalition has been tracking this and has been looking at the changes that we've seen from year to year. It has also in the past looked at perhaps other values that needed to be added on this. And one of them was a couple of years ago, a discussion on the freedom from harm, which was a concept brought forth by
You went muted, Olivier.
Yeah, strangely enough, the host has muted me. I don't know who is the host, but so I was saying, yes, it started. So in 2017, the coalition put together a discussion paper focusing on freedom from harm. Windsurf had brought this concept forward, and it was found that yes, this could be an additional core value, as we have seen in recent times the rise of criminal use of the internet and harm brought to internet users for the use of the internet. So it's quite a number of loose definitions and so on. And as Alejandro mentioned, we have also focused on IoT technologies, especially on the side of standards evolution, since the Internet of Things is bringing a swarm of new regulations and so on, and some because there's concern about what IoT devices can do, and certainly the aspects of IoT devices when it comes to privacy and the potential harm that it could bring to end users that have these devices at home. And so the discussion we had at the Eurodig and Day Zero Eurodig session was focusing on this, and I invite you to watch that. You go into the Eurodig, and it's the Thursday consolidated program. Eurodig being the European IGF, IoT technologies and standard evolution and their impact on co-internet values. So we've done a lot of that. Now today we are following on what we had discussed in the past, and that's of course the follow-up with regards to the COVID-19 impacts that we've seen on co-internet values, where the world is changing. It's changing very fast, and everyone says, well, we're living in a new world, post-COVID, pre-COVID. We're not even post-COVID yet, and so many changes are happening. And certainly there's a rise of a lot of potential regulation, which is in some way required, but in some ways might be overreaching. And I hope that we'll be able to first see what the impacts are on the internet and on co-internet values this year, and then see really what the problems are as well, and what we might need to address as a community in the future. I think I've said enough, and we've got a fantastic panel, so I'm really pleased to see that. And over back to you, Alejandro, and or perhaps should I just hand the baton directly over to Olga Makarova, who was last year with us. She's from Mobile Telesystems, and she a Russian telecommunication company, and she has some interesting data and details about the level of the impact of COVID-19 on the internet and on their networks. Thank you.
Thank you. Can I share my screen?
So Olga, you have to share your screen. So you click on share screen, and you share your slide deck, and then you're in full control.
Is it okay? Can you see my slide?
Yes. Yes.
Okay. Thank you. I started. Thank you. Hello. Last year we tried to find some connection between the growth of internet traffic and the curve based on the Kubert-Ross model. At that time, we were far from understanding when the stage of accepting changes would come. Fortunately, this year the situation has changed dramatically. They see the normal consumption of internet traffic. So the pandemic has become our new normal, and the internet has helped us to accept it. But the controversy over the internet vulnerability has escalated sharply. This article about the BGP hijacking by a Russian telco appeared in April 2020. This happened in the early months of the pandemic when all Russian telcos were looking for a way to make the internet stable for their customers. It was just the mistake of people who work incredibly hard. They made the mistake by accident when they were modifying the routing tables. We're all people, but not machines, and of course not gods. We can be mistaken. The article is rather sharp, but it emphasized some important points. When the internet was born, it was basically a club of friends who did not need security based on trust between devices and people. As of February 2020, there were more than 94,000 autonomous systems allocated. We are about to hit 1 million roads. According to Cisco, there will be about 300 billion mobile apps downloaded by 2023, but the number of DDoS attacks will double by 2023. There was phishing, speed phishing, spoofing, farming, illegal content, as well as social media, VR, artificial intelligence, cloud computing, edge computing have become part of our lives. The era of unconditional trust on the internet is over. We need to start moving from trust to authorization. The question is, which way? American scholar.
Olga, just jumping in, sorry, but it seems your slides are not moving forward, so I don't know whether are you flicking through the slides at the moment, because we're still stuck on the first page.
Sorry, just a moment, okay. Где? Посмотри, зайди сюда. Just a moment, Mike. Нет, понимаешь.
Maybe you need to go in presentation.
Yes.
Остановить демонстрацию. Дальше опять демонстрация экрана. И вот этот вот экран. Не два раза.
Okay. Okay.
Yes, now it's working.
Yes. The curve of traffic growth. Yes. The article about the BGP hijacking. Yes. We are about to hit 1 million roads, and this is Cisco figures. Okay. American scholars Chris Denchit and Peter Dombrowski promote the idea that national borders in cyberspace are technologically possible, psychologically comfortable, and politically manageable. In her later work, Chris gives a new idea for cyber resilience alliance because Western states will no longer dominate in global internet. This work is fiercely controversial, but now we see that many states have started moving in this direction, filtering internet traffic and demanding to weaken the encryption. Could this path be right? Let's take a look at another opinion. South Korean scholar Gus Swander backs the opposite opinion. South Korea has restricted anonymity, content, access to foreign sites, and e-commerce activity to support the centralized security function and social integrity of its cyberspace. However, such activities have limited the commercial potential of South Korean internet. Gus suggests that this strategy likely led to increase in identity theft of South Korean citizens and made the South Korean system more vulnerable to attack. It is impossible to solve a problem in one country relying only on local laws when the problem is global, for example, as BGP hijacking. The global tech community has been trying for a long time to solve the problem of BGP hijacking with the resource public key infrastructure, but no one has been hurried to implement it. Probably the pandemic has started the process. Anyway, a few months earlier, we started receiving messages from our partners about their intention to enhance routing security with RPKI, and we joined this process to prevent traffic drops. Many participants from different countries have done the same. This is a good example of successful move from trust to authorization backed by stakeholders. Unfortunately, not all problems can be solved this way. But the idea of building the internet cyber Westphalian system does not look completely right. So it looks like we need to find another way. Could the GDPR, with its approaches and its success, look at the slide, form the basis for a future internet regulatory framework? Today, the GDPR only protects the personal data of European citizens. Following the GDPR logic, each country must approve its own GDPR. What will happen if all states, including, for example, China, Indonesia, India, and others, adopt their own GDPRs? Could UN treaties and convention become the foundation for a future internet regulatory framework? For example, we have the Outer Space Treaty. And nowadays, the internet is huge and complex like space. Of course, it might be incredibly difficult and long work, but what else? I'd like to end up my short report with the words of Sharon Gilliard and Mitchell Kakor. Interoperability is like Tinkerbell. It only works if everyone believes in it. Thank you. Can you hear me?
Yes, we can hear you. Thank you
Yes,
very
we can
much.
hear
Thank you for your presentation.
I am afraid.
Hello.
Are we taking?
Welcome.
Mhm.
You really sound welcome. I would just like to thank you very much personally for joining, and I would like to commend your excellent, extraordinary book on standards development.
Thank you.
You and your co-authors really made a very, very great contribution. Thanks.
Thank you. Thank you very much for inviting me. I'm very glad to be here. Shall I just go ahead and share my screen and start the presentation right away, or are we? Yes. Okay.
I think yes, please.
Okay. Okay, thank you for being here. My presentation mainly relates to the core principles of openness and also interoperability. And I'd just like to draw your attention to some of the things that are happening. As Olivier mentioned, things are moving very, very quickly. And there's been a recent greater state cooperation overseeing standard setting, in particular in the area of emerging technologies. And interestingly, however, this has really gone hand in hand with a move towards data sovereignty. So where can we see these efforts? Most of this can be found in trade agreements with increasing cooperation between the United States and the EU. DG Connect and NIST have been intensifying cooperation in cybersecurity in particular, in consideration of standards and certification schemes and mutual recognition. Under the US-EU trade negotiations, we see a number of areas of regulatory cooperation. In 2019, 3 areas were agreed in 3D printing, robotics, and connected vehicles. This was widened in 2020 to mutual recognition of results of conformity assessment that has to do with standards. And then we saw a move to accelerating the recognition of international standards for e-commerce. Also, towards the end of 2020, the European Commission High Representative of the Union for Foreign Affairs and Security Policy agreed to develop compatible standards and promote innovation in targeting areas of online platforms, big data, 5G, and an AI agreement and cross-border data flows. So we see particularly increasing cooperation, not only during initially the Trump administration, but also Biden. So there has been a cross-party agreement over transatlantic cooperation. Most interestingly, also, we saw strengthening of US-EU relations in 2021 with participation of the US Secretary of State Blinken in the EU meeting of the Foreign Affairs Council in February, which was a really interesting development, never has happened before. And then in the June 21 summit, the EU-US summit, which discussed technological cooperation, the creation of a high-level trade and technology council. This went hand in hand also with a joint technology competition policy dialogue and plans to launch a dialogue on security and defense. So you see a lot of this cooperation in the area of defense and cybersecurity, of course. The High-Level Trade and Technology Council established 9 different working groups, which you can see here. And these covered cooperation on technology standards, supply chain security, which is where we see a lot of data security and data sovereignty coming to the fore, ECT, security and competitiveness, data governance, and technology platforms, amongst others. So where can we see evidence of the development of recognition of core principles in parallel, and how can we participate and shine a light, create more transparency in these developments? At the EU level, we have reference to principles of the public interest and human rights being integrated into the 212 regulation on European standardization, codes of ethics, and the 219 AI proposal. As I stated, this goes hand in hand with the drive for data sovereignty. The 219 Cybersecurity Act, which strives to harmonize certification and standards in supply chains, amongst other things, requests that an easier move to closer cooperation with universities and research entities, but in order to, I quote, contribute to reducing dependence on cybersecurity products and services from outside the Union. We also see a push for conformity in EU standards within the AI proposal, which came out this year. At the global level, as many authors have pointed out, there's a potential for incorporation of core values in standard setting based upon principles set out in a number of organizations, notably the IGF, but also more formalized fora like the ISO and WTO. But there's very little evidence of reference to these principles in day-to-day decision-making on the ground. Certainly, there hasn't been any mention of the IGF's Internet Governance Forum's Dynamic Coalition on Internet Rights and Principles. However, we do see further development at the UN level within other fora, and also beyond the UN. The WEF's Global Future Council on Human Rights has a key strand on technology and technology's impact on human rights. The OECD has developed guidelines for due diligence for responsible business conduct as a part of its human rights theme. And also the WEF has been initiating a global standards mapping initiative, talking about shining a light and where digital rights groups and third sector groups can maybe get involved and be aware of current developments. But how can we translate these developments into day-to-day decision-making? The integration of core values and principles in standard setting has always been very challenging, but now we have more tools at our disposal than ever before. The most effective methods to date has been the integration of third sector scrutiny into decision-making, particularly if you look at voluntary SDO standards making, the funding of third sector involvement is important. The recognition of core principles within decision-making across the board has been important as well. And yes, how to integrate third sector groups and kind of wider groups into not overseeing decision-making, but inputting in decision-making, and also making decision-making more transparent and understandable to wider audiences. I think, however, one issue which is really truly coming to the fore is this digital sovereignty issue, which is one to watch. So I would say use these international tools in shining a light in day-to-day decision making. That's all I would like to say. Thank you very much. Okay, that's the end of my presentation.
Thank you. That's wonderful. There's so much in there. So for now, we'll move on to our next speaker, who will be Bob Franks. Younger people don't always know who Bob Frankston is. He programmed, produced the first electronic spreadsheet, which was physical, which was the first killer app for the PC. Years later, he was in charge of home networking at Microsoft, and that's only the start of his achievements. And he also has very sharp and global views on what the internet is and should be, and it shouldn't be. So forward, Bob, welcome. Thanks for joining.
Okay, it's a little my background. I've been online since 1966. And learned about the basic design principles of the internet before there was an internet. And a lot of it is counterintuitive. And you know, some irony here is that we assume Zoom can work. We assume there's huge capacity for Zoom, but that's only because of the system architecture in which we didn't try to solve all the problems at once. And I don't know how many of you are familiar with the term best efforts, the underlying mechanisms that sort of allow for the internet evolution, and why it created capacity. The main thing is that it decouples the infrastructure from what we do with it. And I worry about proposals which try to tie all these things together into one lump. And I see 5G as the perfect anti-internet. That basically from the industry that was unable to make video a product for half a century. So the goals are very laudable, but each one needs to be addressed on its own terms without tying them all together. And the current internet I still see as a prototype. It's even more so for the Internet of Things, which goes back, we're about at the stage where the Apple II was in terms of personal computing. And we don't understand enough to regulate it, especially since if I get rid of my background here, choose the virtual background, let me just shut it off for 1 second. You can see I build things. So I try to understand why this works. There's one essay I wrote that explains the reason we have this capacity is that we decoupled sort of the mechanisms for the infrastructure from what we do with it. And part of this is understanding what do we mean by the term the internet. It seems as if I use the comparison of the blind man trying to understand what an elephant is. That the internet I see as, you know, I used to think the internet was a good term for all we've done, but in fact, the internet is sort of a use case for something larger, that the set of protocols and everything we call the internet are basically one way to use best efforts connectivity, but it's still a prototype. The DNS has fatal problems in that it tries to be a trademark system and tries to be a directory and tries to be linkages. And those have to be separated out. Concepts, I look at 6F like identity and things. Those are basically applications. And one of the big points about how the internet works is that we don't try to solve application problems in the network. And that's really where it became decoupled from the earlier telecommunications networks. They had a big interoperability problem. If I had one video standard at one end, another at the other end, the network had to make them work together. The internet, we don't try to solve the problems inside the network, but make them application problems. But at this point, though, the term internet adds confusion, but people think of the internet as Facebook, as the web, as the applications. And we need to be able to talk about this using different terminology, so don't try to solve all the problems at once. I mean, I could spend a lot of time, I'm looking at my notes, trying to explain each of these things in detail. But the challenge is, how do we solve these social problems, societal problems, without breaking the basic underlying mechanism of interconnectivity? Interoperability, for example, means the ability to exchange packets is, the reason we have the packet level interoperability is because we're not trying to do, as I said, application level interoperability. That's external. So, I can go on, but I think the main point is the calls of 6F are laudable, but they each have to be taken on their own merit. And we need to be able to talk about, without using the term, the internet, which basically is a meaningless term at this point because people have so many different definitions of it, and talk about each of them on their own merits and as separate social issues, not as technical issues. Well, they're technical issues. We have to talk about the technology separate from the social. So I won't go on, but.
So I think this gives a first start of the picture, and we'll hear more for sure.
Yes.
So our next speaker, Gregory Name from the UK, on some very interesting stuff you've been studying in detail. Looking forward to your intervention.
Okay, Alejandro, thank you very much. Hello, everyone. Last year, this coalition supported a statement on excessive controls. We singled out practices we find problematic in terms of core values, including internet shutdowns, suppression of political dissent and fragmentation, etc. Well, little has changed. We perhaps can have a look at what governments are doing now. Number one, shutdowns. We know that around 30 countries resorted to internet shutdowns last year, including in Europe. This is not a trend that is diminishing, so much that now even the United Nations Human Rights Council is looking into it. Number two, political suppression. We continue to see the implementation of national security laws that regard political dissent as terrorism and restrict freedom of expression on the internet. Number three, encryption and privacy. There have been calls to weaken encryption to tackle cybercrime, including terrorism and child abuse. One example is the draft online safety bill in the UK. Accordingly, social media platforms will have a duty of care towards users, an obligation to limit illegal content and/or content deemed legal but harmful. It's likely that they will be required to scan the contents of your private messages for legal but harmful content and for illegal content. And the only way to achieve this is to break encryption. We know that there have been calls within government to treat end-to-end encryption as a breach of the duty of care. The effect on political activism and investigative journalism will be detrimental. Weakening encryption will allow also private legal content to be scrutinized, also legal content. To quote from the Open Right group, there will no longer be any such thing as personal communications. Everything we say, no matter how private, will be fair game under the bill. Only email and SMS services are exempted, and these are typically insecure in any case. End of quotation. As an additional problem, this is an approach that makes security look like a binary choice between favoring the rights of this or that group in society. This is dangerous. Number four, fragmentation. There is a trend towards a fragmentation of the internet, as we've just heard, into different international groups of legal standards and regulatory practices. In some countries, we have the creation of a national internet. Other countries are suggesting to force among other things, DNS services to meet some reporting and security requirements that will put a further burden into their operation. A recent example is the European Directive on Network and Information Security, NIS2. To quote from a statement of the Internet Society, this approach risks the creation of multiple layers of accountability and clashing obligations, threatening the autonomy of DNS services and resilience of the Internet. End of quotation. There is a risk of even further fragmentation if more countries decide to come up with similar regulations. Fragmentation is already happening. What we don't know yet is how far it will go. This is a brief outlook on what governments are doing in terms of problematic behaviors. We may call shutdowns, political suppression, weakening of privacy and fragmentation the principal trends and challenges we are facing at the moment. We have difficult times ahead. These are global challenges. For a long time, the belief was that they could be tackled by voluntary action based on best practices. But the reality is that obviously many governments now clearly disagree. But this doesn't mean that every country should go its way. And before every government tries to reinvent the internet, the lesser evil would be at least to consider acting together, also through the power of international treaties. Among other things, as it has been pointed out, we need more cooperation on cybersecurity, more than private, more than solo national actions. And with this brief introduction, I shall give the virtual floor to the next speaker. Thank you. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Craig. In your next round, we will ask you for very specific things going on, like the European regulations. Okay. But we're moving on right now to our next speaker. Sorry, I lost sight. This would be Jutta Kroll.
Yes, thank you, Alessandra, for giving me the floor and the opportunity to respond to what has already been said. As you can see from my virtual background, I'm a children's rights advocate, and I'm speaking here on behalf of the Dynamic Coalition on Children's Rights in the Digital Environment, formerly known as the Dynamic Coalition on Child Online Safety. I've already heard some references from Alison to the ISO, that they are asking for respect for human rights, and also that she quoted standards should be consistent with the EU Charter on Human Rights. And the EU Charter on Human Rights, Article 24, paragraph 2, as well as the UN Convention on the Rights of the Child, Article 3, paragraph 1, asked for the best interest of the child to be a primary consideration in all actions taken by public authorities or private institutions. And we assume that this priority based on human rights is a precondition to any regulatory approach. And also, I need to underline that the Dynamic Coalition on Children's Rights in the Digital Environment does not see a contradiction between privacy and the protection of children. I can refer to an example from Germany, where I'm coming from, where child protection is covered by the Constitution to the effect that the individual human right to privacy cannot overrule the protection of children. This making a balance of human rights mandatory. And this is only one example that I can refer to. In this sense, the Dynamic Coalition is not categorically opposed to encryption or privacy, but we cannot allow this to provide impunity for people who abuse and exploit children. We stand for a balance of child protection and privacy, and we believe that this balance is possible to achieve. We've recently seen an attempt by a new child safety policy announced by Apple some weeks ago. And this new policy is comprising 3 different measures, including a technical solution to ensure device-side detection of child sexual abuse material prior to upload to iCloud. What is really significant is that the policy demonstrates the possibility for combining technology and policy to offer enhanced privacy and child protection. We've also, as a Dynamic Coalition, welcomed the recent announcement by Facebook that they are postponing the rollout of default end-to-end encryption across all messaging services. And we see that this is indicating that the company is looking at technical solutions that can ensure both child protection and privacy. And let me finally refer to some research that ECPAT, who is coordinating the Dynamic Coalition on Children's Rights in the Digital Environment, has carried out in 8 EU member states, largely because they felt that the public voice in regard of privacy was not heard in the debate. Across the political spectrum of the EU, with France, Germany, Hungary, Italy, the Netherlands, Poland, Sweden, and Spain, the results were quite striking, with 76 of respondents being willing to give up some of their personal privacy, and I explicitly say some of their personal privacy, online to allow for automatic technology tools to scan and detect images of child sexual abuse and detect other forms of sexual exploitation of children. Coming to an end, I just would like to stress that we do see the necessity to give this, sorry, I've lost my word, to give the best interest of the child a primary consideration in actions in this regard. And we do believe that it's possible technologically to bring both things together. It's not a contradiction between privacy and protection. Also, privacy is a right to children as well. So we strengthen the rights to privacy in this Dynamic Coalition, but we definitely ask for a consideration of the best interests of the child in any decision taking. Thank you for listening to me, and thank you for inviting me to speak. We think that it's very important that Dynamic Coalitions collaborate and come across lines that might divide their work. Thank you.
Thank you, Jutta. This was brilliant and very useful. I'm very glad to see that we're getting pretty sharp issues discussed instead of the more vague ways these discussions sometimes go. We'll have a chance to have more of an exchange. But this has been extremely useful, and I'm very thankful. So our next speaker, I hope I'm not wrong, would be Desiree Milosevic.
Yes, hello, I'm Alejandro, and I hope you can
Hi, dear.
all hear me. I wanted to share some slides, but the host disabled participant screen sharing. If that could be fixed, I would appreciate that. Okay, thank you very much. It seems it's working. So in order to introduce this topic, I hope everyone can see the slides.
Yes, yes, they are there.
You can. Okay, fine. So the topic that I would like to introduce is the working group and the paper, Human-Centered Digital Governance. And to give you some background of how it started, as you know, Paul Toomey was supposed to speak about this, and as a member of a group, he asked me to present some of our concepts and thinking here today. So the idea really came while the pandemic was starting, and came from Professor Dennis Snower and Paul Toomey, worrying about the surveillance capitalism and how this is really affecting and undermining Western values that are several hundred years old. And therefore, it's been decided to focus on this issue and what could be done in order to change, what could be done in terms of policy, what could be done in terms of thinking and new concepts to solve this issue. And the answer is the human-centered digital governance, which comes up mainly with one issue and a problem, and that is of the this implied trade and misalignment of internet users using digital services and suppliers that are providing digital services. So we know that today users pay with personal data. They are collected either for a limited or underpriced value. So the group has been thinking about the central flaw in this whole complex system. And it has found out that probably not just the unclear terms without an informed consent is an issue, but these are actually the third-party digital barters, which are invisible in the digital economy, which are quite obvious in the, let's say, traditional economic channels. So the further thinking was that that this problem is causing a lot of issues, and it's not only threatening the economic market system, but it also weakens users or mental health, and it erodes the appreciation of objective truth, and the list is long. However, the central challenge of digital governance that this working group included is that we need to find ways of how to use the technology benefits we have today, but we have to make these digital regimes human-centered. And the work and the thinking of the group is that it relies very much and alongside some of the European policymakers' thinking, and that some of the solutions lie with the EU GDPR. So we have come up with some policy guidelines that are based on 3 concepts, and I'll go a little bit more further what these concepts are: that there should be an official data, the so-called privy data, and the collective data. And the official data is something that should be verified by a third party. You know, it could be government data, but it is really your data that is, let's say, date of birth and name and so on, that is confirmed by an official body. But this official data must receive official authentication, and that should be the only legal source of that data. And in order for the whole system to work, the individuals or the users must have the control and use of the official data. And that is not an easy step, because we need to build supporting institutions and also supporting tools in this environment. And then the second concept is that the privy data has 2 steps, and it would be interesting to get a feedback as well as to granularity of this thinking, whether these 3 layers are enough. The privy data is a data subject data, the user's data, and it's the only legal source of the so-called, what we say, first-party data. And this is something that you generate as a user. It could be blog, it could be posting, it could be something that comes from you. And then the individuals need to give have this genuine control of the first party data, and then the second party P data or privy data is something that is generated about the data subjects, such as location, mobile services, and so on. And that collection and the purposes and consequences of second party P data, they should be transparent to data subject, which is currently not the case. Then thirdly, the proposal is to come up with the collective data. And there are a couple of proposals what to do with the collective data. We need to create legal structures to support the establishment of data commons, the so-called C data, and we need to ensure that C data are under control of trustworthy and competitive organizations that would then promote benefits of data subjects and the broader society. With that, of course, we also thought that we need to include the Elinor Ostrom's 8 core design principles. Perhaps this number 4 here, I hope that everyone's familiar with them, but number 4 says user behavior should be monitored. I think that relates to anthropologists because not necessarily in this case as to the monitoring of official data, privy data and collective data. And I'll stop here just to say that this is a very new concept that is trying to solve a lot of things that we see is wrong in the digital regimes, and that the official data and the privy data need to create new markets, and they would create new price systems with that generate incentives for data provision. And we think that this new classification of data and the supporting organization institutions will then be able to address some of these digital asymmetries of this, what we call digital husbandry, or the third-party advertisers that are there to provide you services, or whether it's a state or non-state actor or influencers, where the data is really misaligned with the interest of the users and the consent is not as clear. So really this is like to introduce this idea of data commons and how we could eliminate the third-party finance digital barter, so that we will create a new market and that we ensure there is a consumer protection there as well, and possibly implement a wider set of digital taxation schemes that would be more visible, so that the economic channels are also easier to maintain. So I know this is a lot to take in, but I'll stop here and would welcome some also questions or comments. Thank you.
Thank you. This is a very bold, overarching proposal. I've been able to see some of the drafts. I'm still not able to come to grips with the whole of them because there's so much in them.
Yes, you are.
There's economics, there's politics, there's a very, very serious piece of goodwill towards citizens, and it really merits more discussion and study. And thanks for bringing it here, because one of the challenges a scheme as big as ambitious as this one will face is, of course, working with the internet, scaling, crossing borders, and so forth, reducing or amplifying friction, whatever you need for these purposes. So it's great to have you here and hear this, and please say hi to Paul, who was last minute unable to join. So yeah. Olivier.
Yeah, thank you very much, Alejandro. Olivier Clapin-Blanc speaking. I guess we're now reaching the Q&A or the discussion part of our session, which is usually the most exciting one. It usually starts a bit slowly, and then suddenly things start moving in place. So of course, everyone is encouraged to comment or ask questions from the other panelists, all the people that are present, but of course the people both in the room in Katowice and the people online. I also noticed that there were some people watching on YouTube. So if you want to ask questions from there or comment from there, you're going to have to go onto the Zoom connection. Unfortunately, there's no way to ask or to participate in two ways directly from the YouTube streaming. And I know there's also some people watching this on the Vimeo streaming, which Jolie is doing, the ISOC Internet Society streaming. There's quite a few channels here. I have a couple of questions to ask from a couple of panelists, but yeah, if you want to ask questions, of course, either ask them in the chat or comment in the chat, or you can also go and put your hand up, raise your hand, and I guess we'll be able to give you the floor. I have a couple of questions. One was for Jutta, and it was to do with the technology that she mentioned, scanning the spaces, private spaces for child sexual abuse material. The question I had for her was, what safeguards do we have that it doesn't get misused by governments and it doesn't get misused by criminals? Because if the technology exists, obviously, criminals are very good at using it.
Yeah, thank you for the question. A very, very difficult one, of course, because like always, once we have a technology, we always have to face that the technology can be misused in certain ways. I'm not a technician, so I cannot provide for a technological solution how to avoid that misuse of a certain technology. What I can stress is that the safety policy announced by Apple comprised of 3 different measures. So what they are trying to do is to bring certain different instruments together to make it as safe as possible and as efficient as possible. So that means efficient in a way that child sexual abuse material can be detected on the one hand, but that the technology should not be abused in a way that, like you have said. And of course, we do not talk only about criminals, bad actors in a criminal way, but obviously also there is a possibility that governments might misuse as well such a technology. But we do see that privacy and protection of human rights in general and the protection of children as part of human rights, these are 2 sides of the same coin. It's not a contradiction. We need to bring it together.
Okay, thanks, Jutta. I'll go through the questions I have, not just for you, of course, for a couple of other panelists as well, and then we'll hand the floor to Shiva, who has put his hand up. But the next question I had was for Desiree, and she mentioned the one point, which was the collection and consequences of second-party P data should be transparent to the data subject. The P data, I understand, is the private data. And so the whole idea is that if a company has data about you or even derived data about you, then it should be transparent to you. Now, I know that in Europe, in some parts of the world, there is legislation where you can actually ask a company what data they hold about you. And they have under the law, they have to give you the information that they have about you, but they don't seem to have this. Well, they can certainly withhold any data they have derived about you. If they've several sources and made up their own mind about who you are, that is proprietary for many of them. Aren't you effectively basically killing because a lot of the internet works on that? Aren't you killing the internet model, which is about collecting information about people and marketing that?
Well, thank you, Olivia, for that question. You mentioned that there are some legal instruments already where the data subjects get that information about how institutions or others use data about them, like the Freedom of Information Act, that you can request from public authorities to give you information what they hold about you as a data subject. But I think what you are asking is, aren't we killing the current golden goose of the internet, which is the advertising business? And which is all done in a very intransparent way and on sacrificing data subjects because with all these other things that I mentioned as bad consequences for the internet users. So we are suggesting new ways, and that is, the use of data commons that could be reused to create new markets and new economic channels and new ways of using the same data, but with the transparency of how the data is used. So that is really the idea here. Yes, replacing the current way how it works, which will take a lot of effort and a lot of support, and also, as I said, creation of new institutions that would hold data commons and that would also look after the privy data and that the privy data has, the data subject has the information of how the data is eventually used. I hope that answers your question.
Thanks, Desiree. Let's go to the queue. So let's see, Shiva Subramanian.
Thank you, Olivier. This is to Yuta, and she was talking about child sexual abuse and child pornography, children's rights, and these are really serious issues, and that issues that merit attention. But in the internet context, when these issues are repeatedly talked about, repeatedly when you talk about children, children's rights, child sexual abuse, child pornography, not only opens the gates to legislation, it kind of opens the floodgates to legislation, and a lot of harmful legislation comes in the way. And particularly during the last 2 years, we have had COVID, which also is an issue that merited a lot of legislative attention. But don't you think we should solve these problems and get back to anchor the internet on core internet values?
Shall I respond directly?
Yep.
Yeah, of course. Okay.
Go ahead, of course.
Yes.
Please. Of course.
Thank you, Shiva, for that question. Maybe you've seen that we had a main session yesterday on emerging regulation, and that had also beforehand in November a prep session to discuss emerging regulation. And one of the messages from these 2 sessions is that we've seen a decade of, I would say, deregulation, non-regulation, self-regulation for the internet. And that was fair enough. It was necessary to liberate free market forces. But on the other hand, we've already seen a rise of criminal activities in all areas. And that is not only regards child sexual abuse material. We have criminal activities all around the internet. And as mentioned before, bad actors are very quick in taking up the opportunities that the online environment provides for them. So for the last some years, we've seen that more and more we are turning to government regulation, to strict legal regulation on state level and on international level. What I'm saying is we've seen that it doesn't work without regulation. I'm not sure how it will work with government regulation. It needs to be a balanced approach, definitely, but we cannot accept that these heinous crimes that are done towards children, that they just go unpunished. We need to have a certain framework where children's rights are respected. And once again, I would like to quote the EU Charter on Human Rights and the UN Convention on the Rights of the Child. Be the best interest a primary consideration.
Thank you. Let's go to Alejandro Pesanti.
Is there anyone else in the queue after me?
Not at the moment.
Because I would like to yield otherwise.
Well, there isn't any at the moment, but I'm sure some might come up.
Okay, so I'll try to be slightly provocative here. I think that children issues are extremely important over the years. I think we're all becoming more and more aware of how bad things can be for minors. There begins the difficulties. Some of it is minors, people between 16 and 18 who already have some degree of self-control. They already have autonomous sexual activity and so forth. That doesn't mean they are in an age apt for consent. But that's one thing, and the other one is babies under a year old and the extreme cruelty which they are subjected to. But all of these things have a physical component that's happening somewhere. When there's an image of child abuse or a video of child abuse recorded and transmitted over the internet, it took place somewhere. The people who did this heinous act, and I'm not minimizing it at all, I'm not underestimating it. These people were in the same place as the men, probably several of them. They were organized. Certainly, otherwise there was a physical location. They were violating the national law, the state law, the municipal ordinance, maybe even their condominiums bylaws for being noisy or having commercial activity. And if we're not able to tackle that, we are not going to be able to tackle the online part only. And that's where I'm concerned, as others have said, and I think Utah is very realistic about this. And we have to have this two-pronged approach where we have the online and the offline parts working in harmony. That's the way police forces come in, when law enforcement comes in, when they smash bands, the gangs that are trafficking in images. And not only trafficking in images, they're actually trafficking in access to the activity. They're selling physical access to the children as well. So we need this two-pronged approach where the online and the offline parts are worked in harmony. As you know, I have insisted on this 6-factor framework, which tells us, how these different things are affected by the online component and whether we can use the online component to actually reduce the damages, identify the damages better, spot where they are starting, and bring them down to some extent. The SERS proposal goes very much in this direction. It would enable people to work with this. What I think all proposals in this sense need to make very clear, I don't think they're missing it because they come from very internet-wise people, but they have to be much more explicit about how they respond to internet scale factors, speeds, crossing borders, and so forth. And in particular for the data, I think there's a risk of being obsessive about the individual data, which are basically of no value. Any social media company would gladly erase all your data if enough other users were left and their correlations were left. That's that's where much of the real value resides, and we need to focus more on that. If there's time at the end, I'll make one more short intervention. Thanks, Olivia.
Thanks, Alejandro. Next we have Gregory Name, and after that we'll have Vittorio Bertola, who's actually in Poland. Gregory, you have the floor.
Hi, thank you, Olivia. I mean, I would like to make 1 or 2 remarks about the situation with encryption and child abuse, not only child abuse, but other cyber crimes like terrorism and fraud, etc. I fully agree that children's rights have to be protected. This is no debate at all. And I think there has to be a balance of rights, but we need to be also aware of the technological challenges. What I cannot see at the moment is how we could find a technological solution that would work for everyone, for every group of society that deserves to be protected, also in terms of human rights. And we need to be careful not to rush into solutions that will solve a problem by creating another, because we risk regarding the problem here as possibly a binary choice between, for example, the rights of children and the rights of activists, whereas we, and also in terms of human rights, we should be striving to enable a situation, to enable a society, to enable an internet in which all these groups can be protected. And if you just say, well, we will we will, according to current technological standards, just weaken encryption so that the state can have more access and control and scan for words and images or whatever, you are protecting children, but you are opening doors for other kinds of actions that may be undesirable in terms of rule of law, democracy, and so on. So I fully recognize the urgency of doing something to tackle child abuse and also terrorism, fraud, etc. on the internet. But we need to be, I think, we need to be careful as well with facile technological solutions. And this is what I want. This is what really makes me wonder. Perhaps someone in the panel, you, Olivier, or someone who is more technically versed well versed in technology than myself. Perhaps someone can explain and come up with further technological alternatives, because simply to weaken encryption, this is not something that I find particularly convincing.
Yeah, thanks, Gregory. In fact, looking at what we have, I'm looking at all the participants. Maybe I see several panelists that wish to respond. Bob hasn't spoken recently, so let's have Bob Frankston. And I think that Jutta, you wanted to also respond to this. Bob. Okay, again, each one of these is a complex issue, but just commenting on encryption, there was an article recently about in Europe about the police infiltrating criminal organizations who thought they were safe because they were using encryption. In fact, they were, but it's a human factors problem. And I think the idea that we could solve all problems by just looking at the wire, isn't the only solution. And the problem we have with encryption is that it's not just about people speaking to each other. For the future of the internet, if we really want a decentralized internet, encryption is fundamental. So we need to find, we need to recognize these are human factors problems, social problems, and not something you can solve by sort of having the right kind of copper that watches the bits going through. Okay, thank you. Jutta?
Yes, I can be very quick. I do think that, of course, I agree completely with Bob Frankton that encryption has a very important role to play. I just would say it's not the only silver bullet to privacy, probably. And with regard to what Gregory said, we've seen the collateral damage last year in December when the e-privacy directive came into force, and making it illegal for the platform providers to monitor for a certain type of content. So they all, for a certain time, they all stopped monitoring for child sexual abuse material, with 90% of this material going undetected for several weeks until the interim derogation from the regulation came into force for the time being. So it's not only the question of technology, it's the question of what legal framework do we have, and that legal framework made the monitoring that the platform providers had enforced with PhotoDNA and other technologies made it illegal for them to continue to do so. So therefore, I'm pleading for looking for technology, but also looking for adequate legal regulations.
Mm-hmm. Thanks, Jutta. Victoria Bertola is next. And I understand Victoria is on the floor in Katowice, so hopefully it's possible to hear him.
Oh, Olivier, can you hear me? Wait.
Yes, we can hear you. Go ahead, Victoria.
Okay, sorry. No, I'm in the room. There was no feedback. Okay, now
we can see you as well now as well.
Okay, thank you. No, sorry, I actually jumped because I didn't want to enter the discussion on child sexual abuse material, though there is, in the end, after hearing the further replies, one thing that I want to say is that I fully agree with Alejandro that, online measures should not be the shortcut to not to do the job in the offline world. And also, of course, I completely disagree with ideas about breaking encryption and weakening it. at the same time, we should be careful about the standards we put, because if the meter we put for any solution against online child sexual abuse material is that it must be impossible to abuse it for other ways, then it's like saying that we don't want any solution. And this is not the meter that is being applied in the offline world. Well, of course, in the offline world, we do have lawful interception. And of course, it can be abused, but we still have it, and we try to put all the adequate democratic guarantees so that it cannot be abused so easily, and so to limit the number of abuses. And even online, there are, I mean, we ask of governments, I mean, they should not be abusing this, but even the private sector is abusing a lot of what it can do. So, I mean, it happens. It's not a reason not to do stuff. But what I really wanted to do is rather to broaden the discussion. Partly, we had already a bit of this discussion yesterday with Alejandro in another session. But it seems to me that we have come to a point where the traditional idea of not having, I mean, we have to defend the internet from regulation because regulation will break the core values, the basic principles of the internet. Maybe it's not up to the situation anymore. So I feel that actually the internet we have today is not the original internet we designed and we loved 20 years ago. It's much less open, much less interoperable, much more concentrated and based on closed systems and walled gardens and stuff that the user has no control upon. And so don't you think, I mean, whoever wants to take this question, that we actually now need regulation to restore the original values of the internet, to defend them, to uphold them? And because if we don't put some rules to the big consolidation of power into big private sector companies, we are actually going to lose the internet in a number of dimensions.
Thanks for this provocative intervention, Vittorio. I can see your panelists thinking, yes, that's quite a thought. Let's give the floor to Shiva, and then I'll see if anybody from the panelists would like to respond to this.
Yeah, thank you, Olivier. First of all, I agree with the summary provided by Gregory, which is an excellent summary of the work that we do. And I wanted to tell Utah that I am committed to, I mean, we are all committed to protecting the rights of the children, but the way the issues are raised is not like the issues brought to the internet, and the internet is being asked, here is a problem, solve the problem. Rather, it is raised in such a manner that there is a problem, the internet is not working, so let's take over the internet. And that is what is doing a lot of harm. And even in terms of the need for regulation, the recent developments on the regulatory arena is somewhat comforting, in the sense that governments are more and more understanding that all stakeholders are to be involved in the intergovernmental processes, and it's gradually becoming multi-stakeholder. And I think that should solve the problem, rather than take a position, as Vittoria said, the internet has gone, and not that, I mean, not his exact words, but he said it's not the same internet anymore, and it needs to be regulated. But we have to emphasize that even the regulation has to have has to be in conformity with the values in which the internet is built. There should be governance values as well. Thank you.
Thank you for this, Shiva. And the word regulation comes back more and more often. Of course, last year we had the coalition did have a statement that it managed to get, well, to share with the community, and several other dynamic coalitions signed up on it, a statement on excessive regulation. And it seems that we are seeing more regulation. Let's go over to Olga Makarova, because she mentioned, of course, the regulation and Russia. That's one of big words, regulating networks. But of course, I'd like to also hear from Alison afterwards with regards to her points, where she said, you know, the integration of core values and principles need to be included in decision making. And are we seeing this in the regulation or regulatory approach that is happening? Maybe not on the international level, but on the national level that some governments are following. Olga.
Thank you. The internet, just a mirror of our lives. The main reason, for example, for child abuse is not that the internet existed, but there is crime. The internet is just environment that can be used by all participants. But for example, if child porn appeared on the internet, it is filmed somewhere and by someone. And we need to fight with one who does it, not with the internet. The main problem of the internet is it is global, but the states are sovereign. But I think we should to fight with real reason, not with internet, to stop child abuse, to stop porno, to stop any harms, any crimes on the internet. Thank you.
Thanks for this, Olga. Let's go to Alison Harcourt.
Hi, Olivier. It's not the question I really expected because I don't think that there has been very much done at the national level recently because it's in the EU, at least, mostly implementation of, looking at now possible implementation of e-commerce updates. We looked at implementation of copyright 218 and then, of course, GDPR. But I mean, we could maybe look at Germany, the 217 hate speech, the DG Nets law, or the 218 disinformation law in France, and then the upcoming proposals for online safety in the UK. Have the core principles outlined by the IGF been integrated? They have certainly not been referred to. I think certainly in the UK case, I think there's more of a self-regulatory approach, and the UK's proposals have been criticised here today, particularly by Gregory, as being overly interventionist. But compared, I think, to France and Germany, I think that they're less so. And I think certainly there have been discussions in Germany as to over-application of the NetzDG. In terms of looking to core principles, I think really I would look more towards the international level and how we can integrate them into day-to-day decision-making and self-regulatory fora, and how they can be integrated into implementation of these national regulations, because most of these regulations are self-regulatory in nature. Also, if you look at the 218 Code on Disinformation of the EU, it turns towards self-regulation and very much relies upon the big tech companies to implement all of these kinds of codes and rules which are being suggested. So as to the future or as to the present, Olivier, I don't know. I mean, as to the future, I think that there can be integration of core principles for openness and transparency in particular. But the problem that I see really is this digital sovereignty. I've been to a number of workshops on digital sovereignty. Most recently, over the last 3 weeks, Chris ran 3 workshops on digital sovereignty, and I went to a couple of panels at the CPR earlier in the year. And it seems, and I've seen people post about this, Alejandro in particular, that there seems to be confusion between cyber and internal market and national champion policies in particular. The rewriting Olaf's Kolken's comments on NIS2 and the rewriting of certain parts into internal market logic, we see also within the AI proposals and in the cybersecurity package as well. And I think this increasing cooperation between the EU and the US that I mentioned before encompasses this, yeah? And we see this in competition law. We see this in a number of decisions like the superconductors in Spain, where there is a kind of closing in and closer cooperation with national champions. And we have to ask ourselves, how much is that to do with openness and interoperability, and how much is that to do with internal market logic?
Thanks very much, Alison. Let's close off because we are running out of time. We'll close off with the last person in the queue. That's Sébastien Bachelet.
Thank you very much, Olivier. I hope that we will not be shut down in 2 minutes. But I wanted to come back to the question of regulation. I think we are missing different things. First of all, it's a law, and there is more and more laws, and there is a regulation, and there is the internet governance, multi-stakeholder governance. And we are talking more and more about regulation. We are forgetting about the law, and we forget about the multi-stakeholder governance, and it's where we are in IGF, and we struggle with IGF because of that. If we end up just talking about regulation or the new laws, we are missing our main goal. It's to develop some solution altogether. And I will stop here because we don't have any more time. Thank you very much, Olivier, and others. Thank you.
Thank you, Sebastian. It's very wise words. Alejandro Pisanti here. Closing remarks. I think that we should look at the ICANN lesson in the sense that we can build several different mechanisms that federate or that have communicating vessels, each of them oriented to solving a specific problem. And over time, some of them will coalesce, some of them will die out, some of them will be absorbed. But we should look at this in a much more creative way, which doesn't preclude, of course, the increasing actions of governments where they are needed. Like initiatives like the one Desiree presented goes a long way in this direction, but we still have to flesh it out and see, test it against different criteria. I'm very happy that all of you have been in this meeting. It's an impressive meeting. I'm glad that you have met because some of you haven't met each other, and that you have come together for this brilliant exchange of ideas. And Olivier, your closing words.
Thank you, Alejandro. Thank you for sharing this. And thanks to all of our panelists. It's been a very interesting discussion, which of course will continue on the Dynamic Coalition on Core Internet Values mailing list. If you are interested in joining, you're not on the mailing list yet, you can send me an email at ocl@gih.com. And quite easily found the address, and we'll add you on our mailing list. And of course, we have such discussions throughout the year, not just during IGF. Thanks in particular to Jutta for joining us. It's great to have cross-pollination between dynamic coalitions. And it's not the first time we've done a lot of work with the Dynamic Coalition on IoT, and also with the Youth Coalition on Internet Governance. But it's the first time we work with the children's rights, and it's great to have that extensive dialogue. Unfortunately, we're running out of time, and they're very tight on time here. I was going to say 30-second tweets from each one of our panelists, but if any of the panelists wishes to just add one little thing, and if not, then no, I see everyone saying that's enough. So thank you so much. We'll have a very quick summary that will be written in the next couple of hours and published on the website, on the IGF website. And then there'll be a larger summary that will be drafted. And I'd like to also thank the good people at Diplo who follow the sessions at IGF and always write some excellent summaries of each one of the sessions. So if there are any questions that I don't know who the person is here, if that person has any questions, they are very welcome to ask me, and we can work things out. Thank you.
Thanking all the hosts. The live stream will be up very soon. Jolie usually has them up as soon as meetings end, so you'll be able to recall the full thing and share it with others. Thanks.
And for those of you in Katowice, have safe flights home tomorrow or even later if you're deciding to visit the region. Have a very good day.
Thank you. Bye-bye. Thank you for having me.
Thanks, everyone. It was great.
Bye-bye.
Thank you.
Bye.